Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to Grade Level Reading. On Facebook and Instagram, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow us at Reading by Third, and on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Once again, welcome everyone. My name is Leah Cruz, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce the conversation today. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but it also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connection, and build the CGLR community. So thank you. And then I have a few housekeeping tips to share with you before we get started. So first of all, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please, in that chat box at the bottom of the screen, you can share your name, your city, your state, or your organization, and be sure to select everyone so that we know who all is in the room with us today. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to engage with us both in the chat box and in the Q&A box for questions for our panelists. We'll dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond live to these questions. The panelists may also respond to your Q&A questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A box. So be on the lookout for responses there, as well as verbal responses. And the webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. The link to the recording and all of the slides, bios, and any resources at all that are shared during the webinar will come to you in a follow-up email at the end of the week for anyone who's registered. And then lastly, we will have a short Q&A or short evaluation, that comes on during the Q&A near the end of the session. So we highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And we really do spend time looking at your responses and trying to understand what our audience thinks and wants to hear. So before we start, the last thing from me is just some of our upcoming Learning Tuesday webinars. So we have, next week we have a double header. So we have, or no, not next week. Next week we have one. Next week we have our More Hopeful Futures or Children as Collateral Damage, a follow on in that series. And that one's going to be about Medicaid. So it's a really important session. And there's another organization doing a Medicaid session later that day as well. So May 13th is Medicaid Day. Then we'll have a Funder to Funder on the 20th, and that's at 12:30. So that's earlier in the day. That one is about supporting children and communities during immigration crackdowns. We also have Education Savings Account later that day for a Learning Loss Recovery Challenge. And then another More Hopeful Futures or Children as Collateral Damage on May 27th. And that will be about Head Start. So that will feature the funding challenges and things going on with Head Start. With that, I will now turn it over to Emily Stamos. She is a senior consultant at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and she is going to start us off today.
Thank you so much, Leah, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining our very interesting session today titled Schools as Safe Spaces, Beyond Active Shooter Drills to Trusting Relationships. And as we've expressed in our messages, research from the Thomas B. Fordham Institute and others, which I just posted in the chat, shows that students feeling emotionally and physically safe in their school environment is correlated with improved student outcomes, including attendance, assessment scores, and more. Additional research, also posted in the chat by our colleagues and GLR Learning Tuesday faculty members, Dr. Pamela Cantor of Turnaround for Children and Linda Darling Hammond of the Learning Policy Institute and Karen Pittman of KP Catalyst and others, indicates that the presence of quality relationships, including relationships with teachers and caring adults in the school, can enhance children's resilience and make them effective learners. This means that concerted efforts to boost teachers' ability to foster trusting relationships and create a positive learning climate can enhance effective instructional practices and help prevent violence and risky behaviors for even our youngest learners. Yet with the multiple and devastating school shootings we have seen, combined with violence towards teachers and bullying between students, there has been a powerful reaction that leans heavily towards hardening schools, almost turning them into forts to promote school safety, which may be coming at the expense of learning. However, given the escalating concerns about various threats to safety and security, many education leaders are also recognizing the need to nurture a sense of safety beyond that hardening through double locked doors and active shooter drills, but by creating a culture of trust and safety among students, teachers, and families. So today we have the excellent opportunity to engage with education and global security experts who will share insights on how to create these safe spaces at school and establish environments of trust and belonging for students, families, and educators. With today's speakers, we have the chance to learn how teachers and other adults, including parents, can be coached to create a positive learning environment and get upstream of behaviors that put young learners, all of our young learners, at risk. We're confident that you'll walk away with useful ideas and strategies to build a positive school culture and a safe and trusting learning environment today. And I just want to reiterate what Leah said. You're going to see a lot of things posted in the chat today, a lot of relevant articles. I've already posted the research. So please bear in mind, you don't have to open everything today. You're all going to get a follow-up message that has every single one of those resources, but we'd just like to kind of highlight things that are relevant to the conversation. And so now I'm really honored to say that we are again joined by our GLR's great partner, Andy Rotherham of Bellwether, as our moderator. Rotherham leads external relations at Bellwether and also works in the organization's policy and evaluation practice area. And he writes a widely read blog called EduWonk, and has written multiple articles on our topic for today, which I will post in the chat very soon. We also, I'm also very excited to introduce our panel today, some great leaders. We have Dr. Garry McGiboney of Children, who is Chief Operations Officer for Health Security Dynamics and is the consultant for several state agencies in Georgia, as well as for federal partners such as the United States Department of Education and the United States Department of Justice. Daniel Mojica is the director of the Chelsea Public Schools and Parent Information Center, Chelsea Public Schools Parent Information Center, where he oversees all aspects of student enrollment for grades pre-K through 12, ensuring families are supported throughout the registration process and integrated into the school system. Drew Pache began his professional career as an infantry officer in the U.S. Army. He was then selected into the Special Forces, completing his 21 years of service with an assignment to the Defense Intelligence Agency. Upon his retirement from active service in 2013, Drew has completed numerous security consulting projects, including 6 physical security surveys at schools in Washington, D.C. and San Jose, California. We also have Yolanda Reid-Wheeler, who has spent 30 years quietly reshaping the lives of thousands of Georgia students, both in school and in life, and is currently serving as an intervention specialist with the Family and Student Support Services team in the Henry County Public Schools in Georgia. So welcome to all of you. I love the different range of experience you all have, and we really look forward to learning from you today. And now I'm excited to turn it over to Andy to get our conversation going.
Emily, thank you so much. Thanks for that kind introduction and for all the wrangling to get this together. Really excited for this conversation. let's start with just a couple of framing things. And one of the reasons I'm excited for the conversation is what Emily said. We have such a great range of expertise here, from seasoned educators, security experts. And often in my experience, the security folks don't necessarily talk to the educators, and the educators don't necessarily talk to security folks in really cross-cutting ways that sort of crosswalk these issues. And so you get a focus on, say, hardening the target without a lot of, which is even language that I don't like when you're talking about schools, without a lot of focus on, okay, what's going on inside of schools, the educational mission, what does that look like? And so when you actually get these folks together, and Drew's done some of that work, which we're going to talk about in just a sec. And then the second sort of framing point that I just do think is really important is, school shootings, particularly mass shootings, are really rare. We don't do as a country large numbers well, and you have millions of kids in school for most of the school year. And these things are pretty rare, but they are also, first of all, one is too many, and they are absolutely horrific in general, particularly if you're a parent and so forth. And so the level of concern and anxiety about them is certainly is very understandable. But because they are rare, you need to approach them as rarer events, and that can sometimes be difficult. I just want to name just so you have to hold both those ideas at the same time in your head. So I'm really excited to have Drew Pache here. Drew does this work. He consults with schools on this. He also has a background in security work. Emily introduced him, but in addition, he was director of security for Global Rescue. He did security work at the Olympic Games in South Korea. He's worked around the world, and then an extensive and distinguished military career. So Drew, let me just start by, you were a special forces officer. Like, what does that actually mean? I feel like a lot of people, like, they hear that and they may have seen a movie. They may have some idea. Like, talk about your background a little bit that you actually bring to this. What does that actually involve?
Well, it's very special forces operators are generally immersed in the culture that they're working in. We live out with whoever we're going to be training or fighting with, or and we operate in small teams. There's only 12 of us, and we could be 20, 25 miles from the nearest friendly unit. So you have to rely a lot on people skills rather than hardware to get by. And developing sort of those relationships and building that rapport is something that's pretty key in that environment. And also, I feel it's a great way to keep your finger on the pulse of any large organization, which includes schools.
So say a little bit more about that. So you're embedded, you're with people. Talk about, like, what are the goals of that? What are you trying to learn? What are you trying to get ahead of?
Well, it depends on the mission. If you're doing the village defense stuff, you use that village as, one, you're protecting it, and two, you use it as a base of operations to go out and do other things of different natures. It could be reconnaissance, it could be direct action, or not to get too deep into that, but yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I assume you're building trust, though, obviously. Like, if the people you're with don't trust you, they're not going to share things with you. Like, you're trying to build a durable relationship, which that seems very parallel to schools.
Right, absolutely. And the stakes are high. You don't get along with people, they could kill you. So it focuses the mind a little. And so yeah, it's definitely a lot of parallels. It surprised me, actually, how many parallels there were between doing that and doing this. Say
a little bit more about that.
Well, like you just said, it's the relationships. It's getting to know people on a individual level. It's not just a bunch of faces in a formation. These are people you've been in their homes, you've eaten with them, and their kids. And so I would imagine, I've never been a teacher, but that's got to be a very similar experience with each class that you have. You get to know these kids, you get to know sort of their baseline personalities, and you get to know their parents real well, and their, whatever situations they're coming from at home. And it's all very valuable information to have if there's something seems a little out of whack, and is potentially dangerous.
So you're trying to get, I mean, the military I know has this term like left of boom, but basically means like trying to get upstream of problems, be aware of things before they're going to happen because people trust you and have shared. So you have you know what's going on ahead of time.
Right. Yeah. The left of boom, it comes out of the, the IED problem in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the boom is what you don't want to hear. And so you try to get ahead of that by a lot of things. You do, the reconnaissance and the people that you know in the town, you get to know, and even a village or city, a neighborhood will have, there's a certain baseline vibe to it. And then that changes. It's usually not good. So, a lot of that same concept is used with your students and staff. And if something doesn't seem right, it's probably not right.
Well, yeah, and this is something that like about school security has always frustrated me, and I think we'll hear more from Garry about this too. 4 out of 5, the Secret Service did a large analysis on this. There's other data that corroborates this. 4 out of 5 school shooters say what they're going to do ahead of time. They tell someone, they call it, the technical term is leakage, but they are, they're obsessed with a past school shooting, or they're giving out signs that they're going to do this. Or, for example, in the case of the Parkland school shooting in Florida, the kid said specifically what he planned to do when he had the opportunity to do it. And so they say this either in visible signals or in explicit ways, and yet the focus is on sort of reacting, which you need to be prepared to react. We'll talk about that physical side in a second, rather than figuring out, so how do you get upstream of that, and to sort of use your phrase, by the time you get to a boom, something bad's happened. So how do you get ahead of that? But the focus in school seems to be very much on being reactive often, rather that's what the industry pushes rather than being proactive.
Yeah, right. I mean, not to be too cynical about it, but there's money to be made in this space. And America is a country that sort of loves its technical fixes. And the other point is that, you put metal detectors or these big heavy doors or cameras and stuff, it's very visible. And you can point, it's something that's easy to point to and show the parents in the town, like, hey, look what we've done. We've spent resources on this. We're trying to solve the problem. So if something does happen, they can cover their butt a little bit. And so a lot of it is theater, though. And frankly, I mean, there's certain things obviously that you need and that do work. But there's a lot of it is just for show.
Okay, well, let's pause real quick on what are the things that, I mean, you've protected all kinds of different spaces and all kinds of circumstances, from the Olympics to work you've done with schools. What are the things for schools that physically they should be, what are the things that they should be thinking about? Like what's stuff that's not theater, but is actually serves a real purpose to keep kids safe?
I think one of the main things, and you see it a lot in newer school buildings, is some positive entry control. You have to know who's coming in and out of that building. You have to have eyes on them. They have to physically check in or have a badge or something that shows that they've been vetted and cleared to enter the building. The first school survey I did was prompted by, it was a family member that was not on the list to pick up this child and came to try to pick up the child. And luckily somebody noticed and asked them about it, and it was thwarted. But yeah, I mean, those kind of things happen. And at this level, this is elementary school level. That's kind of one of your main things is the family or some sort of domestic thing that flows over into the school space.
Yeah, that's a lot of these things. That's what they have in common, is that they're domestic incidents that then play out in the school context.
Right. And so, yeah, your positive entry control is key. I would say that's the main thing. If you can do one thing, do that.
What about like doors, making sure doors are swinging, exits? How should you be thinking about those kinds of things?
Doors, again, not so much at the elementary level. You're not so concerned with active shooters, but all of them should be able to be secured from the inside. quickly. So you're not fumbling with a key or a combination or something. It should just be able to close and lock, because it doesn't have to be an active shooter. It could be anything going on in the neighborhood. You just want to lock the place, keep the kids safe for an hour or so. So the doors should be, they don't have to be bulletproof, but they should be sturdy, not able to be, even the glass, tempered glass, so it can't be smashed in. And there should be layers. You should probably have to go through 2 or 3 different lockable doors before you reach the kids inside.
Okay, so but you don't have to turn a school into a fort. So you're talking more about like basic physical things, and then some common sense stuff like controlling which adults, being aware of what adults are in the
Right.
building,
And
where they are.
this has been a problem for long enough. There's been quite a bit of innovation, and so you can get some really strong and effective, barriers that they look like normal doors. So you don't have to. It doesn't have to visually look like a bank or something.
But as you said, I mean, I think the culture is, if you're gonna, the people selling this, they often come, frankly, from military backgrounds. They have that credibility, and they're selling hardware, and they're incentivized
Right.
to
Yeah.
sell hardware.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to, I mean, people like the theater, frankly. The parents it's comforting. If not, it's not particularly effective, but it looks cool and it looks like you're doing something, and it feels right.
Yeah, and if you're a politician, you don't want to be the politician who didn't purchase the thing that someone said you should buy.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was
And that snowballs.
And talk about training. Like, you hear a lot, there's a lot of frustration with parents that kids are doing lots of drills and so forth. Like, talk about training in the context of like, what should adults be doing without the kids, and where does like just sort of training and tabletops or rehearsals, where does that fit into this?
Yeah, I don't emphasize whole school involvement with the kids. But I do emphasize that every staff member and teacher has to know exactly what to do in any sort of emergency. I mean, this isn't, one problem. This is a response to, it could be on this entire spectrum of problems, from, there's active shooter way far at one end, but there's more mundane things like weather or fire in the building, or that the initial response is often exactly the same. And so knowing the duties and responsibilities, and knowing who to talk to if you can't find the primary, is something that we go over quite a bit on tabletop exercises, with varying scenarios.
One thing you and I have discussed there was a Nashville shooting at a private school, and the administrator who came out seemed to have had some training, because she was able to very quickly communicate to the first responders what she knew, what the situation was, and then let them do their job. And there wasn't a lot of sort of chaos or confusion, and she seemed to have had some training.
Right. Yeah, that was a very impressive response to that horrific incident. And I think I read a little bit about that, and it's been a while now, but they had done pretty extensive tabletop exercises, some scenario work. Again, just the staff, and it paid off. Whereas at Parkland, they had just done a big drill the day before, and it went sideways completely. It was completely ineffective.
Yeah, and I mean, Parkland, you had scale again. Like, I mean, a lot of a lot of the stuff that came out later, the kids were pretty immediately assumed who it was. So I mean, I think that Parkland's one of the classic cases where you had a lot of leakage and nobody addressed it. And according to some accounts, the kids went to administrators and were saying that they were concerned about this, but when they weren't getting responses, it goes to your trust point. At some point, they stopped going, because they were like, "Why am I putting myself out here and taking this risk if nothing's happening?"
Yeah, and I just think it's extraordinary in this day and age that can happen. That someone would come to an administrator or staff with a problem like this, and it gets ignored. We've had too many of these that should be immediately taken seriously.
Yeah, well, in a couple of these cases too, you've had the kids who are at risk, and then they've been given by the family members access to firearms, which was also that was somewhat the circumstances in Sandy Hook, as well. So, like, yeah, adults need to be aware and be responsible. Which, let's bring in Garry. Garry also works with the adults. There you are. Hey, Garry.
Hey, how are you doing,
Thanks.
Andy?
Thanks so much for being with us. So real quickly, just introduce yourself, talk about what you do, kind of as Drew did, help people get situated at Health Security Dynamics.
Well, I work with school systems and state agencies in Georgia and other states around school safety, school climate, how to train teachers and what teachers want and how to provide that training for them. Prior to that, I worked as Deputy State School Superintendent for the state of Georgia for 14 years. And prior to that, I worked in one of the largest school districts in the state with over 100,000 students and 145 schools. So my experience has been kind of the good, bad, and the ugly. I've testified in juvenile court, state court, superior court, and federal court. Testified in several cases where safety was breached in the school and something tragic happened. And my advocacy for school climate and school safety being linked really started because Andy, I was in a school where a teacher was shot and killed by a student. I was in that building when it happened. That school had walk-through metal detectors that were manned by 2 very experienced SROs, but the students still managed to get through the metal detector. But I have to point out this too, though. That school had a very negative school climate. The teachers didn't talk to each other that much. Students were bullied and pushed around, and really nothing was done about it. So that was really what brought me to the point that I became an advocate within the school district and somewhat of a pain for the school district leaders, because I started advocating for us focusing on developing the relationships between the teachers and the students and the administrators, instead of focusing just on the school security measures. And I know we have to have those, don't get me wrong, but that's not enough.
So say more about that. And you heard Drew sort of started this. So talk about the resistance you got and how you worked through that.
Well, it was, several years ago, and even I still run into some of the resistance now, is this belief that, and Drew alluded to this earlier, this belief that if we add cameras, security cameras, and the locked doors, and we have procedures and processes, and we practice and we do drills, then that's what school safety is all about. In education and even outside of education, we have not done a good job of getting people to understand the human element in safety. And we're depending too much on the hardware. But a school is only safe as the relationships are in the school. One of the things we've learned from school tragedies and that is schools can have no secrets. If students are not telling the staff what's going on in the school is operating in the blind. Adults, we're not smart enough to know everything that's going on in the school. If the kids don't tell us what's going on in the school, and like I said, we're operating in the dark. When I worked in the school, I was talking to students all the time. They knew they could come to me at any time. Our SROs were trained. I was tasked with building a school police department, believe it or not, and we did. We built a school police department, had 70 SROs. And when the SROs were trained, they were trained together with the school principals. We didn't have separate training for SROs and separate training for school administrators. They trained together because they had to build those relationships. And our SROs had the training on how to build relationships. They had training on how to be part of school climate. And that came from us understanding that there is a relationship between the number of people who are willing to tell you what's going on in the school and the safety of the school.
And that sounds, you know, the debate about SROs often is very just binary. Should we have them or not? And if not, what in their place, if anything, and so forth, rather than it sounds like you're talking about what's the kind of training, what do you want those SROs to be doing, and what do you want their role in the life of the school to be? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Am I hearing you right?
And it's more than the SROs. I should have said this too, Andy. The staff members need to be trained on what is mental health, what is behavioral health, how can they work more effectively with students, not adding anything on top of what they're already doing. So when I was at the Georgia Department of Education, we did a survey of teachers, and many of them said, you know, I don't really know much about mental health. I wouldn't know how to recognize if a student is in trouble or not. So I worked with legislators in Georgia and received some funding, and we created the mental health awareness training program for teachers, whereby the National Alliance of Mental Illness, Mental Health America, Georgia State University provided training on being trauma informed. We created a menu of mental health, behavioral health related courses that teachers could take for free. And they range from about an hour to up to 6 hours if they wanted the youth mental health first aid training. And Andy, in the last 6 years, 40,000 teachers have taken the training. And that's voluntary. It's not required for them to do that. But it's over 40,000 teachers have taken the training because they want to know. Teachers want to know. And when we trained the SROs, they wanted to know too. What should I look for? Regardless of the age of the student, it could be elementary, it could be a kindergarten student, it could be a high school student. What should I look for as an indicator that a child is in trouble and may need some help? That's how we can avoid tragedies occurring in our schools, is those relationships when we identify what may be going on with a child or even a colleague for that matter.
So two crosswalks I'm hearing from what Drew said, what you're saying. One, listening to you talk about like you have to be engaged with kids, they have to trust you, have to know what's going on. If kids don't have a trusting relationship, that's not going to be a safe school. That sounded like just incredibly similar to Drew's description of what he used to do in special forces, living with people, getting to know them, getting to trust you. That was one. And then second, this sort of, you're essentially also talking about an all hazards approach. It's getting to know what's going on with kids, and that's going to look different for different kids in terms of what's going on, but kind of knowing where kids are and if they're in crisis of different kinds, what's going on, how you can connect them to services. Did I hear that right?
Right. That's right. And when students feel connected to their school and supported by caring adults and are comfortable with their peers, they're less likely to engage in those disruptive behaviors, and they're less likely to make the threats of violence, and they're less likely to harm themselves or others, and they're less likely to have a behavioral health crisis. And like we said earlier, they're much more likely to report issues to an adult in the school. That's why it's crucial for schools and school districts leaders to develop and implement and support policies that focus on positive school cultures and climates. It's a leadership function, Andy. And I'll add this too, and to kind of illustrate what you were talking about earlier, Andy, when you said 4 out of 5 cases of students signaled that they was going to do something. Well, I add to that too, that in those cases, 93% of those cases, it was a student or another student who knew what that student was going to do, but didn't tell anybody. So how do we think hardening of the school alone is going to address school security issues when we don't really know what's going on inside the school with students and what they're bringing to school and what they need? And those issues can be addressed. And I'm telling you, there's no amount of security hardware is going to convince students to report a safety concern. They'll come and talk about what's going on. In fact, if you develop a relationship with students, they'll tell you probably more than you want to know. But those relations don't mean that security measures aren't important, but if they're isolated from the human factors, then a school safety plan is one-dimensional and in my opinion is inadequate.
And would you agree with Drew that he called it security theater, that a lot of these other things get minimized in the name, like and obviously there's plenty of exceptions and so forth, but in general that human side gets minimized in favor of the hardware and the more visible things?
Well, exactly. And I'll tell you a quick story. I did a presentation and a principal told me one morning, real early one morning, one January morning was really cold. She pulled up to her school early, right at sunrise, because she got to school very early. And she saw a bundle at the front door of the school and she wondered, I wonder why the package would be delivered so early in the morning. But then she saw that bundle move, and to her horror, she realized that was a student. So she dropped everything and ran to the front of the school, and sure enough, it was a first grade student without a coat, cold and shivering and crying. And the principal, called her name because she knew her and said, "Are you okay? Are you hurt? What's wrong?" And the little girl said through tears, she said, "My parents were fighting and I got scared, so I ran to my school." Know what she said, Andy? She said, "My school. I ran to my school." That school was her safe place. She knew the teachers, they cared for her, they talked to her, they supported her, they listened to her. Now that's a caring school, but Andy, that's also a safe school.
Yeah, that's quite a story. Let's bring in, on that theme of sort of caring and safe schools. Let's bring in we have two additional panelists who you got introduced to earlier. We haven't heard from yet, Daniel and Yolanda. Like you, Yolanda is in Georgia, Daniel is in Massachusetts and Chelsea. I want to come back to Drew and Garry in a sec, but I want to give you all an opportunity. You've heard this conversation up to this point to just react to what you're hearing and this idea that as Garry just landed, what a truly safe school really is.
Yes, most definitely. In the cornerstone of the safety of schools is that building the relationship. And it's essential for us to be able to understand that we have to have that connectivity with our culture and with our climate. Um, Building of that relationship, the reason why that first grader went to that school is because she felt safe, caring, and the love for her. There was a place, there was a person, there was someone there that was going to make sure that she was taken care of. When we were coming out of COVID and we were having students to come back into the schools, we had to look at who was going to be that one person or two people that the students would want to come back into the building, that the students would want to come back into the learning, that the students would want to come back into their safe space. Now, in order for that to happen, you know that you would have to have historically school climate, school culture, school connectivity that has been taught with those leaders, but also with those students. So sometimes the selection of who was going to be that person to make them feel safe wasn't going to necessarily be the principal. It may be another student. It may be also maybe a community partner. It may be the custodial staff. What we want to make sure that we have is that is universal, that everyone understands that schools have to have that connectivity to who we're serving. And who we're serving are those students. And so we have within Georgia and within Henry County schools the importance of building relationships. We call ourselves relationship experts. And what does that mean to be a relationship expert? That means that you know how to connect to each and every person in that building. That's also including the staff. And so I was thinking about specifically when Dr. McGiboney talked about how we have mental health in the forefront of those identifiables. We have mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid, and also teen mental health first aid. Within Henry County Schools, we have what we call youth ambassadors. These are ambassadors that are mirrored, and what I mean by mirrored, how many teachers you have in the building is going to say how many students that you would have in the building. That's actually trained in being ambassadors in school climate, school culture, and school connectivity. And what that means is that we have a safe space where you want to come to learn and where we have adults wanting to come to work, and that they feel connected to what that expectation is each and every day. So in the expansion of ensuring that we have doors locked, but we definitely want to have people within and outside of those doors that are going to have that connectivity, that when I walk in, there's someone who knows me, someone who cares about me, and there is someone who, if I am having difficulty or a problem, they're going to be able to connect with me on that.
Terrific. And I want to come back to some of the specific work you've led, but that's a fantastic overview. Daniel, as you hear this, what's your initial reaction to what you heard?
Well, I think Yolanda and Dr. McGiboney nailed it with building trusting relationships within the school buildings. Our superintendent, Dr. Beta, has a large emphasis on trying to get to know all the students by name, strength, and their story. And this includes the families as well. We put on certain events throughout the year, beginning with the back to school celebration, where we have community partners coming in. Chelsea is a very transient community, large immigrant community. So we want to make sure that these families understand what we can offer to them, building, trying to get to where they're at, meeting them at their door. So in, as well as, excuse me, other services, Youth Mental Health Day, that's another thing that we really emphasize here in Chelsea. Social emotional learning, which is huge. We know that, we understand that a lot of our students come into our community, into our schools with trauma from their countries. So that's something that we want to try to help them with and educate their parents with. It's a large Latino population, and in that population, there's a big stigma with getting help, mental health help. So that's something that we want to try to break that barrier down. There's online services that we offer for tier 1 supports by the name of Alongside, as well as this other AI virtual for tier 2 and 3, which is called Cartwheel Care, which is accessible to all families and students in the middle school and high school levels, that we're trying to kind of push out there and let the parents know that, we're here to help. We're here to help you guys. Just try to work with them as best as possible.
Okay, I want to get more into some of the specifics of you're doing, but first, I worry if somebody was just tuning into this, didn't follow the issue, they would have heard Drew give an illustration of how these things are transferable, this basic idea of relationships. Garry started talking about in the school context, you guys go deeper and they'd be like, well, yeah, well, why aren't we doing this? And so let's talk a little bit about why is the emphasis? I want to hear about barriers you all have run into, and Garry and Drew. I mean, obviously money, Drew said it's an industry, and that's certainly true. And fear obviously sells. Drew, it seems to me like what you described is not, again, there's a lot of former military now on the school security side. One cause could be what you described is not what lots of people do in the service and not what other branches do and so forth. And so is like what you're talking about is kind of, everything you were talking about was sort of what we would call in education, sort of the softer relationships, all that kind of stuff. So is that part of it? That's just like, is part of it culture in addition to this issue of money and fear?
Well, I think it's also very difficult. I mean, it's not something that there's a lot of metrics you can point to. How do you measure a culture in a school? So it's a lot easier just to put some cameras in and then wipe your hands and go to work. What Garry describes is something that's it's ongoing. It never stops. It's something that you have turnover. You have to get new teachers on board with it. It's very time intensive, but that's just the way it is, because it's so effective. I just think it's something that you have to do.
Garry, you're out there, you're in this. It seems, I think, to a lot of people, they'd be like, well, yeah, of course, everything that we're talking about and the examples that Daniel and Yolanda shared around, the importance of mental health and taking a more whole child approach to this. But yet, billions are spent, according to the reporting by the 74. The market here is $3-4 billion easily annually, and schools are struggling to get support around these mental health and other issues. So how do you see that?
Well, I want people who are listening in to know that things can be done. In Georgia, we have PBIS, Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, which is a framework for improving school climate. We have that in over 1,400 schools. As I said earlier, over 40,000 teachers have taken mental health awareness training. This year, Andy, the Georgia legislature passed House Bill 268, which I think will become a model for other states. It's called the School Safety Act. And in that bill, schools have to have a safe school plan. They have to have in that safe school plan panic buttons for teachers and other security measures. But also, and listen to this, the safe school plan must address the behavioral health needs of students. Did you get that? That's in legislation. The safe school plan must address the behavioral health of students. That has opened up a whole new discussion. So finally, in Georgia, we're seeing the linkage between school safety, school climate, behavioral health, and security. And that's the change in the school safety paradigm that's taking place in Georgia and in some other states as well. So it's bringing that connectivity together so that we do see and we have really developed the safety paradigm, Andy, based on the 3 tiers. Everybody's familiar with the 3-tier system. What we have done in the past is that, as you indicated earlier, Drew, we have school security over here and we have behavioral health over here. With a 3-tiered school safety paradigm change, we're bringing those together where both are part of the 3 tiers. So that's interconnected, and it's going to be like that. It's going to stay like that because it's in state statute. But also, when I've seen this, and Yolanda has seen this because she's done this work, you can see the change in a school when the school climate improves. It becomes a safer school because people are talking to each other. They feel like it's part of their community. It's part of their responsibility to say when something's not right in that school. So it changes the whole culture and climate. And to Drew's point, it's very difficult to measure that, but we've tried to do that in Georgia with the Student Health Survey, which is now the School Climate Survey, which is anonymous, online, and over 400 up to 600,000 students take the survey every year. And that data is very rich, includes a lot of questions, and I won't bore you with all those questions, but I just want to point out one more thing, Andy. There's one question, and Yolanda talks about this all the time. There's one question on that survey. It says, do you have a trusted adult to talk to? And we've done studies and found out if a school has a positive school climate, almost 90% of the students will say, yes, I have a trusted adult to talk to. That's a safer school. That's always going to be a safer school.
I completely agree with that. I think that is actually the most important power question. Is there an adult in the school you could go to that you trust? And that schools that aren't asking that or have low numbers are I think someone said are flying blind on this. Yolanda, so Garry talked about this new law, but I want to push on that because if it was only as simple as putting stuff in statute and then there's there's the whole question of implementation and are you actually are you just doing the bare minimum for compliance? You're actually trying to, if it was as easy as just putting it in legislation, like we would have solved, we have a lot of education laws. So talk about the implementation of that and what it's going to take to actually make that vision that Garry laid out more of a reality. We'll use Georgia as an example because the state is a leader. What is it going to take to make that more of a reality?
Well, we do have to have everyone on the same page. And what's so great is that we have the vision and the mission to develop the whole child. And so in order for that to happen, you're going to have leaders, educators, and I want to also say the students and also the parents in the community. What's so unique about what we're doing is that we're making that connection and making it viable for all, making it consistent. You do have those barriers, but you look at those action plans. We have PBIS action plans. We have school safety plans. We also have mental health plans. We have mental health facilitators in every building of our school district. And so we have a connectivity between leaders and also everyone else. Who are we going to push on to ensure that that happens? And I want to say something that I want to make sure that we do understand. And I always say this: do not sleep on the students. Do not sleep on the children, because once you train them and they are awaiting to lead, once you give them the opportunity and you give them the hand to be able to walk this with you, you're going to have the consistency of the plan of the work that you're wanting to do. As educators, we have to do that line of being the facilitator and the educator, of being the person that's going to actually learn and the person who's going to actually grow. When students and parents see that we are willing to grow together, then that's very, very important. We have something that we do every year, and it's called the Youth Leadership Ambassador Summit. It's an opportunity for this work that we're talking about right now to come into fruition. What does that look like to have specific projects that has to do with safety, that has to do with service learning, that has to do with mental health and wellness? Those are students and those are educators and those are partners within the community bringing forth these projects into fruition. So something that you look at to desensitize or to eliminate those barriers is having excellent partners. One of the excellent partners that we have within the state of Georgia is called Health Empowers. Health Empowers is about wellness, it's about physical health, it's about behavioral health, and they are partners with us in these initiatives. So when we see that we have a hole, we lean on those partners for those instances of what we want to see to have change. But it starts with exactly what that student needs. And it starts with someone who's going to be listening to that student of what is going to be the needed platform for them. Once we get in front of that, and we're talking about prevention and intervention, we're talking about when you observe what's happening, how are you able to identify that? Are you able to identify the problem or the concern? So when we're talking about how we're going to alleviate those barriers, definitely leaning in on your students, listening to them, helping them to understand what is actually needed, because again, they're just waiting for that hand for them to be able to lead in these initiatives too.
All right, Daniel, I want to come over to you to build on that and talk about parents in particular. We've talked about sort of some security stuff in school. We talked about relationships, the importance of that. Where do parents fit into this? And I know that's a part of what you do and a part of your job.
Yes, of course. The parents play a huge role in the school district. we have panels, hiring panels where parents come in the middle schools and the high schools where they interview teachers that apply for jobs, and they provide feedback to the principals. Don't actually make the final decision, but do provide some impact, so they buy into the process. And we also, students are part of that panel as well, the hiring panel. We have school site councils. I'm sure other districts and across the state do offer school site councils, but they play a big role in the policies and any changes that are happening within that specific school and throughout the district. So parents have more say and more power than they think they do. And like I said, when I was at the high school, I said, "This is your school. We work for you guys. We want open communication. We want to make sure that you're getting everything that you need and your children are receiving everything that they need, because we're here for you guys." And I think that really plays a huge role in not just saying it, but following through and actually doing it. And that helps build these relationships with parents and allowing them and building relationships with community partners. That's my job to do, not the parents, and connect them with somebody at that community partner. You could go speak to so-and-so and just kind of giving them a heads up that I'm sending a parent over there. And parents really appreciate that. Opens up the trust relationships with us as a district. And it just grows from there, because what other way? It's word of mouth. That's how it really works. And that works with everybody. There's a great restaurant. So a friend of yours goes and say, "That's a great restaurant. You might go and try it out." And that's the same thing that we have here in Chelsea. Is the word of mouth plays a huge role. Since it's a smaller community. Chelsea is very small, smallest city in Massachusetts, 1.8 by 2 square miles. So people kind of lean on each other to get information.
But everything you just said, I don't think people think of that as being security things. They think of that as being, that's parental involvement, or that's parental information. And I think what's important is those community building activities, having parents interview the teachers. You hear that a lot. It's like, that's a parent involvement thing. It's really, or it's a school community thing, rather than that is, you're building trusting relationships and you're building community, which is fundamentally a safety strategy. And I feel like we have sort of lost that in the desire to put in all the hardware, that these other things are going to start to build those ties that are fundamentally what's going to keep you safe, because people are going to feel more connected.
Exactly. And that's ground level work, right? So building these trusting relationships, not knowing this parent, but kind of sparking a conversation and building it up. And that's what we're here for. It's the trust, the parents trusting us, goes down to the children, and the children see what we're doing for their parents, and they start building relationships with certain teachers, certain, as Yolanda had mentioned, not only teachers or administrators, but also the custodian, the kitchen staff. That helps, and it makes children feel safe when they walk into a building.
And I want to start getting to questions that we've had, but before we do that, on parents, and what do you do when the parents are, I mean, again, the parents, like the demand for the hardware and so forth is not just coming out of thin air. Parents are scared, they're nervous about this. So how do you sort of manage their, I don't want to say expectations, manage their concerns around this, and talk about stuff that, as we said, people don't necessarily think of as security, but is important elements with school culture. Garry, Yolanda, Drew, how do you manage those conversations with parents?
Well, one thing that we do is having parents talk to parents. So we have parents who are trained in this work. And what we have found is that sometimes when we're in front of parents and we're telling them, they don't hear as much as if they were listening to another parent talking about what the needs are, what the safety needs are, what the specifics are needed for their children, that they are brought in about the safety of that school. Parents are great partners. I always say to leaders in buildings, if you want to think about how many partners you have, how many parents do you have? If you have 300 students, you have 300 parents. And if you're looking at those specifics with those parents and what they can do, they're also just wanting to lend their hand and to work with you on that. And so we have a group of parents that actually are trained by us in this work of school climate, school culture, and school connectivity. They do the sessions that we have for conferences. They do the specifics of the questions that are needed for their children, and then how to become better parents, and then how to partner with the schools. We have a department that we created just now called Henry Partners. And it's about Henry Partners on the mentoring level, on the sponsorship level, and on the parent level. And so it's enlisting that particular connectivity so it's seamless. So we all are speaking the same language, but I would say that that is one of the tools that we do use, is making sure that our parents are talking to the parents.
Garry, where do parents fit into your paradigm? And I know, go ahead.
Well, we talked to schools about the school safety and school climate, as we talked about earlier. Has to include the parents. The student health survey and now the school climate survey includes a parent survey. Each school has to have a certain number of parents participate in the survey. But also when we talk to schools about school safety, we tell them, unless you include the parents in the discussion, talking about the full discussion, including school climate, offering behavioral health services for students, identifying the needs of students and even staff. If you don't include the parents in those discussions, then the only thing they fall back on is, well, you need to have more cameras, more SROs, and more safety equipment. If you're not including them in the planning and the discussion, the full discussion about what a safe school really looks like, then they're left to find out on their own. And what they hear is that, well, we need to have more security. So that notion, Andy, comes from, well, it's really on us as educators to bring the parents in to be part of that discussion.
Yolanda, are you explicitly, the stuff you're doing, or whether those parents are doing presentations and so forth, are you explicitly linking that to safety, or are you doing this more under a larger umbrella of school culture, school climate, community?
We do that direct link to safety. We have a safety advisory council that's a combination of students and also parents that sit together. We also have those safety advisory councils connected with our SROs. And so our SROs are doing service learning projects in the connectivity of that behavioral look, as far as looking at what is needed. And then they have the opportunity as parents, as students, and with the SRO to do presentations across the district and also at Georgia conferences and at summits that we have available in Georgia. So most definitely they are trained in that specific area along with the others that we've talked about today.
And Garry talked about SROs and Drew, Daniel, like, where do you come down on, there's a lot of districts took them out, particularly post 2020. Some districts are starting to roll them back in after that. Some are still like, how does this, because that's another one of these things that it can create a culture that is great with some of the activities you've talked about, or it's sworn law enforcement in the schools. And for some kids and communities, that doesn't create community, that creates concern. So Daniel, how do you all think about that in Chelsea, for starters?
Sure, of course. SROs play an important part in our community, in our district. Chelsea, as you may or may not know, is a sanctuary city. We have a lot of families coming here, and our police department and fire department play a huge role in in addressing that sanctuary status. So the SROs, they don't see them as just police officers. These are community. They're out in events. The parents see them not just sitting in a car, but actually hands-on with the students at different events throughout the district. They came up with a ice cream truck that it's a police ice cream truck that goes to certain events and hands out free ice cream. So the parents are that's building trust with the community, with the police officers, and then they see them from that event in their schools. So it's not just about being a SRO. It's about being someone there to protect their children. So that relationship building, and that comes from the district having them, but also the police department hiring the right people to do this work.
How do you all respond to the criticism that this work should simply be done by other adults in the school, and you shouldn't have law enforcement in the school, particularly for at the elementary school level, which we're focusing, specifically on here? How do you respond to that argument, Garry?
I think it's a perception problem where, and Daniel really hit on it as well as Yolanda. You have to change the perception that people have of schools, of school climate, of school safety, and of SROs. When parents get to know the SROs, and Daniel's talking about that, when they get to know the SROs, when they see them at games, they see them at dances, they see them at the prom, and they talk to them and they get to know them, they interact with them. They understand that their role is not just as law enforcement. Of course, they're there to protect the children, but also they're there to listen to and support the children as well. So that perception is one that we really have to work on. And I think we need to do more work on it. And that involves, the kind of the hard work of getting parents and SROs together. When I was in the school system where we had 70 SROs, when they did training, we also had them go to PTA meetings and do presentations to PTA meetings on home security, home safety, community safety, and not just school safety. So they felt like the SRO was not only an asset to the school, but was also an asset to the community. And that really changed the dynamic and the perception of SROs. In fact, it was very common for SROs to be invited to graduations, to weddings, and to family events because they were part of the community. It really shifted the whole attitude about the safety in the schools.
Drew, you've interfaced with law enforcement. What do people get and not get about what they should expect from law enforcement in this relationship?
I think what they expect is sort of what they bring to it, like what's their past interaction with the police have been. If it's negative, they're not gonna, they're gonna have a preformed opinion. So that's why I think that, Daniel, what you're doing, and Chelsea is phenomenal. Treating them as part of the school community and having the same people there. I know some places it's like an off-duty cop that's just there and they change out and they don't interact. They, unless something bad happens, and then so it's always a negative interaction with this person. So how you do it really matters. And to your point, Andy, SROs in elementary school, I mean, I'm not sure. I think it really has to be, threat dependent. Like what's the demographics? Have there been incidents in the past? Sort of just look at the level of the threat that's there and then adjust accordingly.
So what about, I got a couple of questions in the chat box I want to get to a sec. Before we get to those, like, say a little bit more about this. Kids, again, leakage, kids exhibit risky behavior, and that's sometimes very explicit. And then sometimes that's more subtle, like a kid who's constantly Googling has become very obsessed with a past school shooting or act of violence or something. So it takes different forms, but it's all behavior that you should be like, okay, I'm concerned about this person, whether you're a kid, and particularly with older kids are going to see that more than and recognize that potentially more than younger kids, and then teachers definitely. So talk a little bit more about this issue of catching those sorts of behaviors and appropriately intervening and making sure people are getting the support, or that dangerous situations are being headed off.
Is that to me?
That's to any of you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So when you're looking at those behaviors, I think about the systems of schools. And what that means is that when the student is getting off the bus, when they're being dropped off, who do we have there at the door that's greeting them? And they have a behavioral checklist. And not saying that they're checking physically right there of what's going on with that student, but they are scanning, they're observing what's the countenance of those children when they're coming off the bus. There's a connectivity to the bus driver of asking those questions. Did we have any concerns on the bus when they were coming on? That connectivity starting from the very beginning, also talking with the parents, helps with understanding who's coming into the building, and then being able to observe that physically by the scan of the eyeballing. I call it eyeballing. We're looking at it within the cafeteria when they're coming to eat breakfast. What is actually you're seeing that's coming into the building? Another thing that we have put in place behaviorally is having town halls at the beginning of the day. And so that's bringing all those students into maybe the cafeteria, bringing all the students into the gym, or even into particular classrooms. And they may have classroom houses, or they may have specific things that they're talking about or discussing before they begin the day. And so again, you're still doing that observation, that eyeballing, I call it, looking at that behavior, what's happening at that very beginning, and getting in front of that. Now, the key to that is just making sure that that's consistent. And that goes into school climate, that you're doing something like this each and every day, that you are presenting to them something that is a norm and not the abnormal. And so when we're seeing students who are having particular difficulties, then we have our counselors, our mental health and wellness facilitators, our custodians, whoever that trusted adult is in the building, being able to have that one-on-one connection with that student. But it really does take that observation at the very beginning of seeing who's coming into your building, what is their countenance, how are they feeling, did they have breakfast this morning, did something happen the night before, but having that happen on a consistent basis.
So I want to move, got a couple, that's great, Yolanda. I've got a couple of questions. We'll keep with these themes. I want to let's start with, I'm going to start with a sensitive one. Someone asked, do safety surveys and the surveys, do they include surveys of parents and anything about gun ownership and safety at home? In general, my understanding is no, because there's a lot of that's a privacy issue and there's a lot of sensitivity around that. But are you all aware of anywhere to the questioners where they do actually, engage with parents around those questions of safe storage of firearms and so forth?
The parent survey in Georgia does not ask questions like that. It's more of the parents' perception of the school climate, the safety of the school, whether the school is welcoming to the parents. It does not really ask questions about the home as such. Now, the student health survey does ask questions. There are several mental health related questions embedded in the student health survey. It doesn't really tell you much about specifics of home, but however, it does indicate, for example, what is the number one concern you have? And it's always about family. It's not about other students or bullying. The number one issue on the student health survey. And again, that's 600,000 students taking the survey, Andy. Their number one concern are family issues.
And I think it's worth, as we said, I mean, there's been in the Mid-Atlantic, there's been a couple recently of accidental discharges in elementary schools where kids had brought firearms in from home for various reasons, young kids, and then those are discharged accidentally during the course of the day. That's obviously a safe storage issue, firearm access issue at home, because these are young kids. And you're starting to see in Michigan, just for context, that, in a school shooting there, the parents were charged with a series of crimes for not securing weapons, giving their child, who had been exhibiting some red flag kind of signals, giving him access to firearms, which he later used subsequently in a school shooting. So that actually brings us, there's a question in here about extreme risk protection orders, red flag laws. Like, is that an appropriate, in your view? The questioner wants to know, in your view, is that an appropriate tool for school safety? And red flag laws, for listeners, some states have laws. If someone is potentially at risk, there's certain steps that either law enforcement can take. They can limit their access to firearms, things like that. Is that an appropriate response in the context of school safety? That's what the questioner wants to know. The tough question. No one wants to. Let me ask you, Danny, I'm going to put you on the spot. How to help this question, how would you handle, like, those protection orders tend to be towards adults, but they could apply to older juveniles, not really an elementary school issue. How would you all even handle a situation like that?
With an extreme risk for a student in the district?
I think with the question I'm reading the questioner's question. I think would be if a student is that an appropriate tool, and I guess, and how would you handle it? We can move on from the question but I'm trying to get through some of these questions. Let me give you guys a different. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Danny.
I would say if it's identified, because that's more on a personal, it'll be tough for the school district to know that this child or this young adult is the on that list where they're have been negated to own a firearm. But if we do know, I would say that would be part of the on his file, just so that we're aware. I would think so. We haven't come across any like this, but I would assume that would be a red flag, if it's been flagged by the state of Massachusetts.
All right, another question here, and this I promise I didn't plant this, but it is one of my favorites, because it's about bus drivers. If you're not a walker to school or parent drop off, like, the first person from the school system a kid sees in the morning is the bus driver, and the last person in the afternoon. That's why I like this question. So the questioner wants to know, the question just moved, about training of bus drivers on culture and climate. Where do they fit in? I see you nodding, Yolanda. Where do they fit into your training plans here as a method of engaging students? And they really are eyes and ears. They can tell when the kid gets on the bus often, like, if they've had a bad start to the day.
Yes, we do trainings with our bus drivers and our bus driver leaders. We do that quarterly. And they are also part of what we call our PBIS framework. So if a student is having great behaviors on the bus, then they are able to acknowledge them of that great behavior that they're doing on the bus. But also they are they're trained in the observation too of the needs of the children. So we have office discipline referrals that we want to make sure that we don't readily utilize them and hand those out. But if we're having a behavioral concern, or if we have a student who is having trouble having dinner or eating in the morning, or they see that they are disheveled when they come in, our bus drivers are talking to our principals and talking to our teachers and our counselors immediately about the needs for those students. But they are trained, and they have a training session at the very beginning, and like I said, consistently quarterly throughout the year.
And in Georgia, Andy, we've had a training with the Georgia Pupils Association, where all the bus drivers come together as part of association, and they've received training on school climate. As Yolanda said, they're a critical part of the school climate PBIS training. They've also been given training on how to verbally de-escalate students on buses, how to not break up a fight, but try to resolve issues on the bus that come up, how to manage a bus when something does erupt on the bus, how to report something of concern to staff members. So I can say, I think with a good deal of confidence, in Georgia, the school bus drivers are really included a lot in the training. And you can ask a school bus driver in Georgia what school climate means, and probably 95% of them will be able to give you a pretty good explanation of what school climate means, and will add, I'm part of it.
So I'm going to read you all a scenario that somebody put in the question box, and we obviously can't answer the specific. There's a specific part of the question that you guys would not be able to answer about the situation. So I'm just going to give you the situation there generally, and ask you to paint a picture on how you would, under a good system of school culture and the kind of training you're talking about, how you would address a situation like this. So this person says they're currently working with a family in a school district. There's no SROs. The child has displayed some behavior issues, also has an IEP, so they're in special education. The student has advocated for themselves multiple times that he feels unsafe and threatened. He's been threatened by other students in the bathroom and so forth. He took a pocket knife to school, presumably, they don't say, but some editorial, presumably in because he felt unsafe or in an effort to defend himself. But he was caught with that, and he's facing possible charges. So that's a situation that has sort of spiraled like way out of control, to where the student didn't feel safe, and now they're facing charges because of their response to it. So talk about, sort of with the models you all put forward, how do you head that off upstream? What does that actually look like in that scenario?
Well, Drew pointed out earlier that he cannot imagine a school where the climate is such that a student reporting being harassed and bullied and no one would do anything about it. That was a concern that Drew mentioned very early in this. And I have to say, no matter how much work we do on school climate, no matter how much work we do on school security, if you don't have a staff that's responsive, immediately responsive to children, then things like this that will happen. When children feel like they have to make their own decisions and take matters into their own hands, most of the time there's not going to be a good outcome. We have to emphasize, and this is a leadership function. Our leaders in our schools, that's their responsibility. They have to create a climate and a process where there is immediate response to concerns that staff or students have. Not, I'll get back to you tomorrow, or wait, well, that's not really that important, or that happens all the time, or don't worry about it, we'll get back with you later. That's not acceptable. That's just not acceptable. And here's earlier, Andy, you said, what is some of the resistance to this effort? That's it right there. This is hard work. It's easy to put security cameras. It's easy to have metal detectors, but trying to develop relationships and maintaining those relationships, that's hard work. That's something you have to do every day. That's really probably the most resistance to this effort to create a safe school is that we have to do the hard work. And I'm telling you, and everybody works in the school, I think will agree, it's difficult to develop relationships. You have to work at it. You have to develop the trust. And that's not easy to do.
Couple of housekeeping items as we move towards a close. One, there's going to be a poll quiz popping up. You can answer that, and I know our friends at the campaign really appreciate your feedback and use it. So please go ahead and answer that. Also, somebody in the chat hopefully pointed out, if you haven't seen that on this earlier question on emergency red flags, emergency protective orders, that school administrators are now, it's a recent change in Massachusetts, are legally allowed to file one of those if they see a risk that someone could be a risk to themselves, to others. And that allows a judge to temporarily remove firearms. And then there was a question, Yolanda, I'm just going to answer and tell me if this is wrong. Linda, in the chat, somebody asked, does the town hall include all students or just students that staff is observing having issues? I assume it's all students. Is that?
That is correct. It's all
Right.
students.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. And then there's a couple of comments on SROs and normalizing and so forth. But the question I want to end on is, and I want to start again with you, Drew. Somebody said, how often should safety and security strategies and systems be tested in support of these things and making sure you have fidelity to the plan? And this is something, Drew, you and I have talked about, because you've told me you've gone to schools and they have an elaborate plan, but it's sitting on a shelf and appears maybe not to have been read in quite some time. So talk about like the if you're going to do these things and sort of the training and how do you get to that level of fidelity. I think it was you, Yolanda, was emphasizing it has to be just a part of what you do constantly, or it's not a habit. So I want to finish on that question here from all of you, starting with Drew. Like, how often should these things be tested and probed? And that includes the range of things that we've talked about here, so many of which are not traditional security questions. Drew, you go first.
Well, the security aspect of everything is, it's always a cost center, either for money or for time. And, testing, doing something that's off, outside of duty hours or something, additional to, to have this big tabletop exercise scenario driven, it can be tough to squeeze into a school year. I think it's worth it to do at least once at the very beginning before the students even show up at the end of the summer. But you can I've seen a lot of really creative principals and safety officers just integrate, during fire drills, just doing different creative little things to test the system that they have. And if everybody knows their role and responsibility during any sort of event, they don't have to know the big picture. They just have to know their job. What do they do with themselves and what do they do with the kids? Phone calls to make. It doesn't have to be a huge 800-page plan. It can be very simple if people know their jobs.
Garry, Daniel, Yolanda.
Well, I can't emphasize enough just what Drew said. It has to be simple, it has to be clear, it has to be rehearsed, it has to be discussed. Once it's done, there has to be a debriefing to find out what worked, what didn't work, what needs to be adjusted, and that's ongoing. That discussion needs to take place throughout the school year, and the feedback is critically important. Now, having said that, we don't want to create a situation where it becomes so routine that it's then not taken seriously. So there is a balance you have to find there, where you don't get into so much of a habit that it then becomes a situation where the real reaction is compromised.
And I would just have to say consistency is key. And the authenticity of that work is also key. Whatever action plan that you say that you're going to do, you want to take those action steps.
Daniel?
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Consistency is key. We do it several times throughout the school year. We inform parents of what the drills are so that they're not worried of what's occurring. But it's very important to follow through and let them know that we do have a plan in place in case something should happen.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to thank our panelists in a second. I want to just double back right from something we said at the start that I think underscores this. We heard a lot of things today about culture and climate and school security, the things that people don't think are security. And we started off with a military veteran, 20 years in special forces. And I asked him, like, how do you keep people safe and what do you do? And we didn't get an answer about hardware. We didn't get an answer about guns. You got an answer about you got to get to know people and you got to trust them. And I think there's just an enormous lesson there and an important lesson. And it's not hard to see the divergence between a lot of the emphasis when we think about security and then a lot of the things that you all from different perspectives talked about on this call. So on webinar. So thank you very much for that. And I think there's some real lessons. And I want to thank you all. The panelists are putting their contact information in the chat. If you want to follow up on things they said, compare notes. If you want to engage them professionally for professional services, their names will be in there. Daniel Mojica, Drew Pache, Garry McGiboney, and Yolanda Reid-Wheeler. Thank you all so much. Sarah Torian is going to come back to bring us home with any other housekeeping. And Emily, thank you so much again for all the cats that you heard.
Yeah, so I will come on for the final words, but so thank you to all of our amazing speakers. I just love that we have a Green Beret and a PhD singing the same tune, because really what it comes down to, and then of course our amazing district leaders, like relationships. So please come back and join. Thank you. And Andy, thank you for your brilliant moderation. Really, you just made
it was a fun, important conversation. Thank you.
And just really quickly for our upcoming sessions, as was announced in the beginning, please join us next week. And for the focus on Medicaid, and then the following week, we have a double header looking at philanthropy supporting communities amid immigration crackdowns, and focus on education savings accounts. And then the following week, we're going to take a look at the same deep dive into what's going on with Head Start. So thank you, everybody, for your participation today, and enjoy your evening.